Hey there, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Sales Chatter. And today we're going to talk about going solo, but it's not quite what you expect. Ryan, when I say going solo, what do you think of?
I thought we're breaking up. I thought Sales Chatter is coming to an end, and you and I are going out on our own. Well, it's a little bit biased, right? When you think of going solo, a lot of people right now, and I attest this to really COVID myself, Dan, where a lot of us, we got that in Canada here, we got money, and I know a lot of people they weren't working. So they got
Yeah.
the CERB money, and I saw so many people start cake businesses. They started gig work, and they started all these amazing things. And when COVID was done, it was like, I don't want to go back to the corporate office, man. I don't want to play under somebody else's rules and make somebody else rich. So I'm looking forward. I think the conversation is going to go there today. But yeah, I'm so excited for today, brother.
Yeah, you know what? That for immediately I start thinking, well, if I need it done, I got to do it myself instead of surrounding yourself with a team, right? I didn't quite think of us breaking up, but that's a good place to go. But I guess I knew where I was going when I said it. So, but today, we've got a very special show today because I just finished a book called Going Solo. And Ryan, I know when we read it, we've talked about it quite a bit. Today, though, we'd like to bring the authors, Jean-Benoît and Julie, on and just more discuss a few key areas of the book. We'll show you where to get the book after, but we want to bring them on because I think one of the biggest parts, especially in our industry, right, is you talk to a logistics person, you say, well, how do you negotiate? And they often come back and say, well, I just offer a better rate. And I'm like, well, that's not really negotiating. That's dropping your drawers to get the freight. So I'd like to bring Jean-Benoît and Julie in because we are going to talk negotiating. How are you both doing today?
Fine,
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be on the show.
Yep. We're excited to have you, and we're excited to dive into this book. So not sure if you guys know, but every Friday Ryan and I do a book club, and we're on book positioning right now. So I think this is going to transition very well into the book we're doing, because on tomorrow's show we talk about chapter 4 in positioning. So this will actually give us a great starting point because negotiation. How often do you guys face salespeople that don't really understand the core concepts of negotiation?
Salespeople? Hard to say. I mean, we're in a world of freelancers and solopreneurs, and I would say, a lot of people struggle with it. A lot of people will start their own business for a passion. It's our case as well. We're writers. And not maybe get tripped up a little bit when they realize that they have to do business.
Yes.
And, it's like, okay, they wake up and in that, and that's one of the reasons we wrote the book, there's, everything we take them through from developing a business plan to managing and et cetera. But negotiations is where, everything comes together. Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the big issues, and just what you guys finished talking about, is key. People will start a business often after having had a job, and they'll tend to think of the people that they're working for as bosses when in fact they're clients, they're customers. And I mean, one of the big themes in the book is that the customer is not always right, and it's not always the right customer for your business. So we have 2 chapters devoted just to negotiating in general and negotiating contracts, where, I guess you could say we encourage people to flip it a little and think about, put their purpose and their needs first when they're deciding on what they want, what they're willing to compromise on, how much they're going to ask, and what kind of conditions they're going to expect. Of course, when you're starting out, it's harder to sort of, have that kind of confidence, but I think it's key to surviving in our industry, to being able to, not act like an employee when you're in negotiations with people.
I often say to people, I think I get on top of any negotiation 9 times out of 10 or 19 out of 20, and it's because I actually don't often negotiate the price. I negotiate everything else.
Yeah.
I negotiate the job, I negotiate the conditions,
The deadline,
the ownership,
expenses,
because
the ownership, yeah.
as writers we produce copyright, so ownership is an important issue. What we own, what we write or not, and what do we own exactly, and terms and expenses. And once you've dealt, because as writer, it's often easier to write long than short, oddly enough, and so a higher fee is in fact secondary. If you can write longer, you actually work less for more. So it's all in the and understanding what the person wants and what the person can do. We're often faced. Remember, Julie, we had this guy who wanted us to ghostwrite a book about his life, and he had all these great ideas. It would be a bestseller in the New York Times review of books. And we had to explain to him what book writing was, and we had to go that far. And in the end, it didn't pan out because he realized it would not be a book, New York Times book review selection. And he decided not to go, and it was okay. We avoided a bad contract.
We avoided a headache. Yeah.
If we had dragged him and told him a story, you would have found we had dragged him into something, and that would have been bad. So in that case, our negotiation stopped. And there's also the post-contractual negotiation. There's when you begin the work, there's still negotiation, because in our case, it's what we deliver is intellectual, and sometimes the reality we confront is completely different from the expectations, and therefore it modifies the assignment. And sometimes deadline doesn't work, something arises. So there is a constant, good communication is essential to doing a good production, but it amounts to also a form of continuous negotiation in the sense that
it's ongoing. It never stops.
It's ongoing.
I guess
Yeah, I agree with that. And, one part of your book that I loved exceptionally was when you dive into not every customer is the right customer. Ryan and I talk about it all the time, because in our world, in the logistics world, anyone who has freight is technically a customer. But there's customers that give you, 5% of your business and take up 80% of your time. And there's customers that you make very low margins on, but they want dollar store prices, but they want filet mignon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, right? Wrapped in bacon. So it's like, we're constantly struggling with this aspect, or salespeople are constantly struggling with this aspect of the business. So when we were asked, do you want to talk to Julie and Jean-Benoît? I said, well, let me see the book. And I was like, yeah, definitely. You guys are right in line with Ryan and I. So actually, Ryan, before I get in, do you have any questions you want to ask before I dive right in here?
Yeah, of course. I want to acknowledge Julie from what she said earlier in terms, and I want the audience to really take that in, that, when we go through these processes, like, all customers are not going to be great customers for all of us. And I love that. There was one part of your book, great book, by the way, congratulations. This is amazing. That really stood out to me, and I've been waiting to ask you guys this question because I've had this circled on my calendar. But you guys talked about there was a passage about workers in lumber camps. They were taking an hour to eat lunch and rest due to like horses' needs, right? This was like in the back old days.
Yeah.
But because it was an interesting perspective on the pace of work. How do you think now, because we're so fast paced, whether it be logistics, our life, everything is, hey, we need it now. Hey, I need ramen. I need that delivered into my house in 30 minutes, as opposed to driving, or I need something from the grocery. I can get that delivered. How would you both say that we can apply these lessons from the past to our current, basically fast-paced, technology-driven work environments?
Great question.
Well, it would be like a little different in every environment, but I would say probably most environments of things have sped up a lot. I mean, we identify some of the factors, just to return to the earlier question about, trying to decide who you're going to work with and who's a good fit for you and so on. And there's a great, and I don't know if this is really new, there's like a great urgency to everybody when they talk to you about what they want. It's always got to be fast. They always want things standardized. It's always been that way. And now there are ways to make it happen faster. So people expect it to be faster. But like, it's a red flag when you're negotiating with somebody and they're pushing you to do things faster than you can. So, we're back to what we were talking about earlier. That's how I would answer your question. Like, we need to recognize when someone's pushing us and it's not a good, and it's to get us working sometimes before we've established good conditions. This probably rings a bell for you guys. Or working fast and then, okay, we'll talk later about, like, okay, it's good, I just want to get going and let's talk about other stuff later. It's so important to slow it all down, whether they like it or not, when you're starting a contract with somebody. So you get everything down, everything clear as much as possible. I mean, there are always things that are a little outstanding. And of course, you get it on paper, because one of the tricks is to like push you to start something and then we'll do the contract later. Like we've all heard that, and it never works in our favor as self-employed workers.
It's easier when you have a differentiated product than when you sell something that other people sell in exactly the same format. It becomes more of a rat race. But I think that that image in that Chaplin's movie in Modern Times, when he's stuck in the gear work and he's trying to fix it and he's stuck in the gear work. I think it was a very strong image because it depicted a North American mentality with respect to the economy. We think of ourselves as gearworks in the machine, and everything is about productivity. And we lived in France for 3 years, and remember being stunned and enraged at sometimes at the fact that they would take an hour to eat. Like, for example, you go to the dry cleaner at lunchtime and they're closed. Well, when do you want me to get my dry cleaning? But I said, we're eating. When do you want us to eat? And they have a different mentality. They're as productive as us, but they recognize the need of stopping and eating decently.
Without being bothered, without rushing, without, in our industry, it's a massively fast-paced industry. And I can remember dealing with a large paper company and paper printing company. And they had so much business in a short period of time that in literally 30 days, so like literally before they got the third invoice, we'd racked up over $400,000 in sales. And everything was just do it. Whatever you got to do to make it happen, just make it happen. And in the end, my company ended up eating close to $80,000 in charges because there was no approval for it. And it was probably one of the biggest lessons, probably the second biggest lesson I've ever learned in my life, because as a logistics professional, our mission is to help the customer achieve their goals. So I'm sitting there with this, I'm achieving the goals of the customer. And I've got verbal confirmations from the customer that just go. When we start debating the invoices, because they come back and say, well, we don't have anywhere that's approved these charges. I said, we'll speak to this individual. And they said, well, he's not here anymore. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I have no emails. I have no written confirmation. And that was quite a lesson. I'm going to tell you. I mean, it was a very expensive lesson.
We have this debate about, good clients, bad clients. And that is a problem that pops up whenever we've worked with somebody we know, somebody who's a friend, somebody, and we're not always as careful to make sure, A, that they're going to stay in the position that they're in, wherever they are. And B, that, we're talking to the right person when we're negotiating our contract, because indeed, you have to know that the person that you're talking to is the person who's going to make the calls or get the calls. But yeah, those kinds of things can really trip you up when, and when you don't have things clearly defined in your terms as well. So
to me, the contracts that turned sour were always the ones that I started too quickly and didn't have a good understanding of what they actually what they actually wanted.
Yeah, me too.
What expectations were, or what. Yeah, I mean, I see that a lot, and especially in things that happen super fast. Like there's times in logistics where we have customers ask us to move freight. We haven't even done a credit app on them. So we don't even know if they're financially stable, but they're like, this is important. It's got to go. It's got to go, especially during COVID. Like that was huge where people would say, I don't care what it costs. It's got to get there. And then you start doing credit apps. And I mean, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I can remember times when I would submit the credit app after we picked up. And then my company would come back to me, and this is going back 25 years now. The company would come back to me and say, okay, Dan, so they have really bad credit. We're not giving them credit. It needs to be COD. And like the load's en route to delivery. And I'm like, okay, now I'm having this pirate conversation with somebody where I'm sorry, I have to hold your freight until you pay me. And it's kind of like that, get them in and then kind of trap them is the way I felt. Right. But in the end, I remember saying to my manager one time, I'm like, no, this is crazy. Let's just do this one load. And he says, Dan, you didn't do things the way the company is set up to do them. We don't take freight right away. We always do credit apps. You decided to do it backwards. It's your job to have the conversation with the customer. I don't care if he doesn't like it. The fact is, our credit team denied them credit. What are you going to do? Right? You want your commissions. We got to get paid. And it's kind of like when you understand that, it's like, okay, we didn't go through the step by step. And usually when we don't, and again, Ryan, share with us from your perspective, I could pretty much say every single client in my almost 30 years tenure in this industry that I did not go through step by step, there was always a problem in the end.
Yeah.
Always. And I know, Ryan, you got taught a little bit differently, right? Because the two areas that we kind of came from, we came a little bit differently because you were in ops first, right?
Yeah, I was completely opposite in terms of that. But, when Julie kind of mentioned something that really stuck out to me when she was talking about, the deals that don't necessarily go through are the ones when you're too close to that person, right? Having that separation from like family and friends, because I don't know about you guys, but anytime like I work in dog rescue, anytime somebody has a question about dogs, I'm the guy that they call. So I would assume with you guys being like you guys work with freelancers and solopreneurs as well, if anybody is wanting to write a book or anything like that, you guys are that connection for people. What advice do you guys kind of have for like people who are freelancers, are solopreneurs? What homework should they be doing before they even approach both of you guys?
Great question.
For like what? I'm not sure I understand the question. Like,
yeah. So my apologies. So earlier on, you mentioned that you guys help solopreneurs and freelancers.
Yeah.
That's a part of your business.
Yeah.
What homework should those people do before they kind of get, instead of like, okay, let me come out and just empty out my mind, vomit out whatever's on my mind. And like I want to bring it back to the story where you guys mentioned that somebody thought that they had the New York Times bestseller, but realistic, they're probably going to be a bargain bin at the bottom of the discount bin at Chapters.
Yeah.
What advice do you guys have for people or who are
like when they want to write a book or some kind of project like that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Oh, I mean, then it's funny enough, how much they understand what they're getting into is part of the price that I'll end up charging, right? So if I'm dealing with somebody who already has a good understanding of the publishing industry, that's important. If I have to do a whole bunch of education about how publishers operate, how literary agents operate, how the process of writing a book happens, what the steps are and so on, that's going to be all part of like what I would throw into a book writing project as, consultancy, because I have to teach people that. So to answer your question, if someone comes to me and they've already looked on the book market and they know what kind of book they're selling, they know what the competing titles are. That's the first thing we do when we write a book proposal, which for us is like a little business plan for each book we write, right? So if they're looking at the market and they can see what the competing titles are and where they want to be sort of on the imaginary bookshelf, because it's kind of virtual now, it's not really in bookstores anymore. That's the key thing to know. And then all the questions can be sort of answered after they've understood where they are in the market. That's a really tough thing for writers and people who want to write. People romanticize what we do. That's a really hard thing for people to get their heads around. And even for young writers who want to write a book, who I'm just giving some advice to, it's like, figure out where you are on the bookshelf, because the person in a publishing house who will accept the project or not accept the project, there's something called an acquiring editor, who is the person that will call you and say, yes, we want your book. Where do you guys think the acquiring editor goes? The first place that he or she goes to see if they can do the book? Sales department. So it's like it all comes down to that, and they have to know, and the sales department is going to look at the book, and they're going to look at the titles that are like it, and they're going to say, okay, this has a this kind of book sells, or this kind of book is just like weird and doesn't have a category and is a big risk for them. So all of that, and that's the whole unromantic part of writing. But you have to do that kind of homework. So when I'm starting a new book project, I go out and read similar titles, and then I fold those into my project as like, see, this sold. It's like my book. See, this sold. And of course, part of the book proposal is to say how much better my book is going to be, and that's the sales part.
I've given a couple, more than one, many in fact, workshops or lectures with chambers of commerce or local development agencies and stuff, and people come to me for all sorts of questions, sometimes about dog grooming or their graphic design business or their consultancy and this and that. And they say, they ask me sometimes very elaborate and complicated question. And one of my first is, have you started dog grooming or whatever you want to do? And I say, and they sometimes, and so if they tell me, oh, I'll do dog groom when I'm ready, I say, stop. You have to start dog grooming. You have to trash it. You'll never be ready. I mean, you'll never be ready. I mean, it's a learning process all the time. And even when when you master your trade, there's always something new to learn. There's always a client that comes that wants something new. You will always be trashing around.
It's always
and so if you want to write a book and you don't write, and then stuff will fall into place, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it will certainly not fall into place if you don't write. So, and it's the same with dog grooming. It's the same with graphic design or painting or doing jewelry or any kind of
logistic sales. If you want to make money, you got to pick up the phone and make the calls. You can't dream about what you want to talk about or thing. I'm listening to both of you, and Dan, you could attest to this too. Like, there's so much relevancy with our industry. Like, I'm listening to Julie talk about, qualifying the customer, making sure that, hey, I need to picture myself where I want to be as a sales rep. Do I want to work in a certain niche? And you both are talking to us, and my lights are going off. And I know the same thing with you, Dan. What do you think?
1000%. It's funny because as you're both talking, I'm smiling more and more and more and more, and inside I'm just going, man, there's you talk about writing a book. First thing you got to do is actually sit down and write, and then if you write it, you can always give it to an editor to make it better. There's always ways to do that, right? And in sales, Ryan had to jump off. I don't know if you guys know, but he had to jump off at 25 after. In sales, it's the exact same thing. You have to send an email. You have to send a DM. You have to pick up the phone. You have to create a video message. You have to create a voice note. Like, all of these things are just what we got to do to get going. And for you guys to bring up the fact that, it's never a good time, I think is key, because how many times do we hear people stop and say, oh, I'm going to start this on Monday. I'm like, but today's Wednesday. Why are you going to start on Monday? Well, a fresh week. It'll be time. I'll be ready on Monday. And I'm like, okay, well, what's stopping you from being ready today? Well, I got to practice. I'm like, but why? Like, and they answer and I'll go, but why? And they'll answer and I'll go, but why? Because we dig deeper and deeper into, and eventually they stop and go, yeah, you're right. Why don't I just start today? And I'm like, right? Like, why do, even if it's exercising, well, I'm going to start on the Monday because it's the beginning of the week. To me, that's just a procrastination tool to give yourself a little hit of dopamine, because you're like, well, that's a great way to do it. I'm going to start Monday. And then something happens Monday and we don't start, right? And then something happens Tuesday. And then all of a sudden it's like, next Monday, I got it. I own it next Monday. And then that, you're laughing, Jean-Benoît.
Well, it's the same for example, saving for holidays. People will say, oh, I can't save for holidays. Why? Well, because I can't save 15 or 10% of my salary. Well, start with 1.
Yeah.
Start with 1%. You'll see it's easy. You may go to 2 and then 3. And then you might realize that 5% is going to be just fine.
Yep. And then eventually you just stop missing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's awesome. So if somebody were to come to you guys and I'll get back to the negotiating for a minute, because I think this is a very, very, one of the most critical parts. Like Julie said, it's the intersection of all sales, right? Whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're working for somebody, whether you've got a product, a service, it doesn't matter what aspect. Every single piece of department, every single department and every single business is about sales. And I think when we as individuals realize, like in our business, we have operations, we have team leads, we have, dispatchers, everyone's selling. What would be some negotiation strategies that you would say? And I'd like to start at the beginning. So what would you need in order to start a negotiation?
Starting a negotiation.
Well, yeah, you have to have a clear idea of what you sell. Which is, but in our field, which is quite intellectual, it's what we actually sell varies from client to client.
Yeah, that's
so, but you have to have a good idea of what you sell. You have to be able to walk away. You have to be able to say no psychologically. Because I would say that's another very important element. And you have to be convinced that the client is not always right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing we talk about in the book is defining your client's expectations.
And I was hoping you'd go there.
I think it's like part of, like, it's like you need to know what you're selling, but you need to know what they think they're buying too.
Yeah.
And so we have a whole section with questions on, I think we have, looking at the book here, like 9 questions to answer, like that tell you, the things you need to understand about what they think they're buying. And I would say,
and also understand where they want to go with what they're buying. What their goals are with what they're buying. I see a lot in our industry, and I'm sure you see it in your industry as well, where it's just the expectation of, we just, you can buy this, and it's like, but does that meet? And here's where I'm going with this, and I'll rephrase it a little bit better. Is if your solution doesn't help me get to my goal, it doesn't work. It will never work long term, right? And I often, you've probably heard the comment where people say, I can sell ice to an Eskimo while we're standing on a glacier. And I've often said that is the worst salesperson on the planet, because an Eskimo doesn't need ice. Right? They might need maybe a hot dip machine or something. I don't know what exactly, but you guys get what I'm saying, is that and I used to say it too. I used to say, oh man, I could talk an Eskimo into buying ice. I'll ask him to step aside and cut the ice sheet out from underneath him. And it was so egotistical, in that it was just this perspective that I can sell anything to anyone. And then very quickly in my career, I've realized I need to sell people things that are going to make their lives better. So how is this conversation? How is what I serve, what you guys serve, what everybody has as their product or service, how does it raise the client's status, right? And I would think that would that not be a major part of the negotiation piece as well, as really understanding where that prospect, hopefully soon to be client, wants to go with your product or service?
Well, as Jean was saying, not everybody, a lot of people come to us for book projects, and they're not sure exactly why they want a book.
Okay.
So one of the big things that we have to do is, make sure we all understand what we're going to achieve. Sometimes they think that, a lot of people think that whatever they write is going to be a bestseller. I'm not sure why. We've been in the business for 30 years, and we've written a couple of bestsellers. It's hard work, it's not, you can't pull it out of a hat. So that's dispelling that illusion is often important, but they usually want the book to achieve something, and they need help understanding what that's going to be. So is it for money? If that's the case, I would suggest that they do something else, because, books, one-off books, unless they're from somebody super famous, don't often make a lot of money. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Are they writing it because they want to increase their prestige in their field? If that's the case, perfect. That it does the trick. One book always does that. Are they trying to reach a wider audience? Good, but a book doesn't reach a wider audience unless you, back to sales, unless you promote it and
Yeah.
work and
Sell
get
it and promote it to reach
Exactly.
a wider audience. And then you
In
go
other
back
words,
to
what I'm saying is
objective
that
number one of making money.
they have to understand it's a tool to do something.
Mhm.
And that helps us a lot understand what they're going to do, how long it's going to be, what kind of thing it's going to be, if it's going to be popular or academic or, key to their professional audience. They've got to understand who they're writing for, which is, they don't always think about that. People just, so, that's part of, those are discussions that happen in our negotiation process, but, they can also happen afterwards. If people really are fixed on a book and they have the means to write it and they have good knowledge, we're usually up for it, but we need to make them understand at some point, what they're getting into and what kind of responsibilities come with that. And just
and I think with you saying that, you're speaking to in essence, your clients, and saying like, what do you want this to do? I remember when I wrote a book, the original vision was New York Times bestseller. I think most people that get into books are like, right, that. And I wrote a book on logistics, the 4 pillars of logistics, and I spent almost a year writing the book, and it was everything. I had everything in it, and I quickly realized it was a better business card than trying to go for a New York Times bestseller.
There you go.
Yeah, and it was and the fact that you brought that up, the fact that it's in the book, and I'm giggling, guys. I'm literally sitting there going, holy doodle, this is like, I'm seeing myself in every chapter. And I think any salesperson, for those of you watching and listening, go grab this book, because I'm sure you'll see yourselves in these chapters. And even starting with and it's not necessarily about a book. It's the fact that all of these strategies, all these chapters, I think it's 369 pages. And it's chocked full of really cool pieces of the puzzle that you might not know you're skipping. Mm-hmm. And I think as a salesperson, and as our job as salespeople in every company, in every business, our main mission is to help the client achieve their goals. Yeah. And really attuning our product and services towards that focal point, that paramount point in their business where we help them achieve their goals. Yeah. And that's where we find all our success. Like Zig Ziglar said, you help so many people get to where they want to be, you're going to get where you want to go. Right. Yeah. And I thought a book was like the thing, where like, I'm going to get it's going to be simple. Because obviously I fell into the marketing of how people market being an author, right? 2 weeks to New York Times bestseller. Well, little did they know they marketed it for, 4 years before, somebody famous got a hold of it and tweeted it. And in 2 weeks they became you know what I mean? There's all these things, but it was very, very, very interesting. And I'm so grateful that you guys wrote the book, because it really got me to stop and look at different areas of my business. And the fact that, you pointed out 3 of the most critical pieces of negotiation. I start looking at it, and I start thinking of the students I speak to. I start thinking of early in my sales career. I'm trying to negotiate half blind. And I think we see it everywhere. Do you guys see that quite a bit when you go into your negotiations, that either the people you're helping with it or the people you're negotiating with are kind of like half blind because they haven't dug this deep into, what does my product do? What's my niche? How is it going to help? And how am I helping the person that I'm trying to sell it to? Yeah. Like I can imagine, and I'm saying this because I can imagine you, just like myself, have probably talked yourself out of many deals, because it was like, if we go into this, I'm in it with this vision, you're in it with this vision, any decision we make will never see eye to eye.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I approach the first, when I have the contact with the client, I approach it a bit like a consultancy for the first 15, 20 minutes of talk, and when you're inexperienced, you're a bit afraid of telling them that their idea is no good, that it could be improved, or that they should not do it, because you're afraid of losing a client and all that. And it did happen sometimes that I say, look, what you're proposing has no sense. Should do this. We don't want to do that. Bye. And then they call me 6 months later. We like your attitude. Would you like to do this? But the most of the time, I would say 9 times out of 10, I'm the specialist, and they trust me in that advice I give them, and I orient it and added value to what I was about to negotiate. I haven't talked about the price yet, And I've just added value to my stuff because I'm steering it towards my thinking, and which will simplify things, and they will be more confident about me asking for more because they say, "Oh, this guy knows his business." But we do a lot of tailored stuff for every client in our case.
Yeah.
So it's important. But I see it everywhere. My father had an engineering consultancy, quite a big one, and he was complaining all the time about his associates not following protocol to negotiate with clients and starting with not understanding the job.
Not understanding the job. I know.
We're talking engineers who are working on a slow business of making plans. I mean, that and writing books, that's pretty slow. And, we have to study the thing. It doesn't move forward. My father worked for a year on a jail. But you have to understand what the jail was.
And price.
Yeah.
I don't believe price is negotiation. And I'd love your guys' take on it. I mean, I know obviously in everything we do in life, price does become a factor somewhere in the line. But often when negotiations start with price, it's a conversation to the weeds. Do you know what I mean? Where, like you mentioned it, Jean-Benoît, very, very well. And so did you, Julie, at the beginning of the call. You negotiate this bonus or that ability or that strategy or this, and you don't talk about price till the end.
Yeah.
It's like, what are your major issues? What are the challenges? Where do you want to go? How do you see us helping? And then in your own heads, processing how you can help and actually bring the person there. And it's like, you're here, you want to go here. Here's the benefit of being there. Here's my price at the end. We're seeing it a lot more with websites these days where they don't put pricing on their website. They say schedule a demo or schedule a conversation with somebody. And part of me, I'd love your take on it. Part of me says that's very big because they're pulling price out of the equation, and they're going to get you on the phone and say, okay, what are the challenges? What are the issues? Can this product help you? If it can, here's how it can help you. This is what it's going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys see that more and more these days, as opposed to the flip side of it, where here's the price and here's what it does?
Yeah, hard to say. Like in our market, we're in a market with more or less not fixed prices, but stable fees, I would say, for certain kinds of writing. So, our negotiations involve us assessing what other factors are involved in the project that make it worth writing for X.
Okay. So in writing, then you're saying that there's kind of a standard per chapter, per page, per word, per kind of thing. Is that what you mean?
Not for books, but for translation that I do a fair bit of,
okay.
And for magazine writing, the prices are sort of out there. We with experience, you negotiate up over the years, of course.
Yeah.
So, but nevertheless, you're working in a sort of frame of fees.
Yeah.
And so, what I will consider before I take on a client, particularly for a regular gig, is what else are they bringing to me that makes it worth it for me to work for them for this price? So I will, it's all the things we talked about earlier. It's like, well, in the writing world version of them, I guess, do they bring me clear subjects that I don't have to go out and figure out what it's all about? Are they clear about what they want? Sometimes they bring me contacts and interviews themselves of people they want me to speak to in the article that I'm writing. That saves me a whole bunch of time researching them, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. They will give me the topics and not be a client where I have to produce ideas constantly.
Yep.
Which is also more time I put in to do that. I mean, I work for those clients too. It's a different scale of price because it's more work for me to do that. Mm-hmm. Are they flexible about when I have busy periods and I back off? It's okay. I have a client who I call when I'm not busy. I do whatever I want, whenever I want. And when I'm busy, I say, I'm busy. I can't work for you for maybe a month. And she's totally fine with that. And that all works into what makes a good client for me. and what makes it worth me to work for her. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Like
That makes
and so the
total
price
sense.
indeed not the point. Like the price up, obviously I'll try to negotiate the price up as much as I can. You know, I'm in sales, but it's we all are. But a whole bunch of other considerations will have to come into that, you know, and those are the things you find out in the discussion. So it would be a mistake, I'm saying, for me to like totally eliminate writing a potential client because the fee is a little low. Because maybe there's there's like stuff to it that makes it worth it for me.
You know, that reminds me of you know, actually I'll go back a bit here. For all of you watching and listening, what Julie just said there was critical. I mean, how many of you in your sales right now, or even think about the last month, have acquired the type of information that Julie and Jean-Benoît are talking about? You know, if you haven't, I think you're leaving a lot of the negotiation tools on the table, especially when it comes to, you know, how are you going to make my day better as in the customer's head, right? Like, how are you going to make what I'm trying to do better? And if you don't have this information, you're speaking on A and they're looking at Z, and you'll never connect. And I think it's the second time this interview I've said that, but I think it's so important that, you know, you guys won't start a negotiation unless you have these factors in place and you've been around the block, you understand how negotiation works, you understand how this works in your business. And really that applies to every business. If you don't get those crucial details, you're leaving yourself open for challenges. And, you know, I don't know anyone that's woken up every day and said, oh my God, I can't wait to find issues today and fix them. You know what I mean? Like, I think we wake up in the morning, we want to help people. We want to help our clients get to where they want to go.
Speaking of that, I just wanted to add, and I think this will ring true for you as well. In addition to seeing what else they put on the table, I have to make it very clear what I'm putting on the table. In addition, you know, very clear. So they're going to come to me and they're going to get somebody who's reliable, who doesn't skip deadlines, who pays attention to details, who has, you know, extra experience that makes it worth it for them. And I know, you know, for a fact that the clients that I work for regularly are relying on that. I'm in a special market. Daniel, understand this market, English, French, a lot of translation, a lot of cross-cultural things that need to be done. And so I bring something very unique, which is that I write in both languages and I, you know, bridge those two worlds very well. And they know they're not going to find that very often. So that is something that I use, that I bring to the table, that increases my fee in the end. But, you know, if I neglected to tell those things in negotiation, then, you know, that wouldn't help either. So, you know, you have to be clear about what it is that's special that you offer as well, and you know, what you're saying about making their day better, like that's what it all comes down to, you know, making their life better. Like they have, you know, confidence, they can relax a little, you know, and that has a price.
But there's so many hours in a week, and you can only add value to what you do, not by working more, but by adding value in your research and the way you manage your things and the financing. And in negotiating, the way you add value is first and foremost by understanding and advising the client on what they want. And that then justifies whatever value you want to add to your fee. And for 15-20 minute discussion, that's good value. That's very well paid hours, you know. If you earn 25% more on a $10,000 contract because you took 15 minutes more to talk to the client, that's a lot of dollars per hour, you know.
Dollars per minute, never mind hour. And you know, that's I think this is one of the big keys when it comes to negotiation is, you know, having that understanding and being armed with that information. Because if you're not, I honestly don't think you're doing the customer justice by working with them. No. I really don't. And I know some salespeople might completely disagree with me, but I think if there's not a fit like that, there will never be harmony in the business relationship. Right. And who wants to work with somebody every day that just complains about the work that's happening, right? If you didn't understand where your clients wanted to go with their book and you went and wrote it, even based on their direction, when they read it, it won't be the direction they're looking at going because they don't even know where they're going. So, you know, if you don't know where you're going, any street will get you there.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like now you're sitting there and you're going, okay, if any road gets me there, I'm kind of like a wandering generality instead of like a focused individual. So I love that you guys did that. Any closing? Oh, so before we go, how can people get a hold of your book? How can they get a hold of you guys and share with us a little bit about what's next for both of you?
The book can be found in any bookseller in Canada. In Canada
and in the United States.
Just make sure for Canada that if you want in Canada that there's a little maple leaf on the top, on the cover.
The U.S. edition, there's no maple leaf.
Has no maple leaf. Just make sure about that. And
so Indigo, Amazon.ca.
So I've got the U.S. edition. So what's the difference? So I got unless you don't have it on the PDF.
Okay. No, the Canadian edition. They're quite. It's the same book, but everything tax wise and negotiation contract wise.
Okay. This different.
All the references are American, whereas this is really a book for Canadians.
Well, we have a chapter for Canadians that says GST is good for you.
That obviously isn't in the American edition. So,
it's not in the American edition.
Yeah. So that's the answer, but where to get it? They can reach us at our website, nadeaubarlow.com. And what's next for us?
Yeah.
We're looking for an apartment in Paris right now. So
there you go. That's a great look.
We're heading back to France to
from Toronto to Paris.
Yeah, no, from Montreal to.
Oh, you're in Montreal. Okay.
Well, yeah, we're going back to our first book, which was a bestseller, 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong. We finally convinced our publisher to do a new edition of it 20 years after publishing it. So we are heading back to Paris to do some research this winter.
Yeah,
so,
2 months.
Yeah.
Good for you guys. Thank you so much for being here. And for all of you watching and listening, go out and grab this book. I mean, I didn't know you had a US and Canadian version, so thank you for pointing that out. But there is some, and it's funny because now I'm realizing when I was reading those sections, I'm like, geez, I've never experienced this before because I've got the US one. So I was kind of like, wow, I've learned something. So now I got to scratch that off because I started working towards some of that and it's not even going to work. But all you watching and listening, thank you so much. Make sure to go out and get the book Going Solo. You will not regret it.